Hi, everyone. I'm James Garbutt.
And I'm Denny Dumas.
And this is the Garbutt Dumas Real Estate Podcast.
Tony Spagnuolo of Spagnuolo and Company Real Estate Law Firm joining us today. This is very exciting. Tony's kind of a legend in our industry and very pumped to kind of get his take on what is happening on the legal side of real estate transactions due to all the changes of COVID-19 in the last month or so. Tony, thank you very much for joining us. I know a little earlier than you would have liked, but we appreciate you accommodating our schedules today.
More than welcome, guys. Looking forward to this. But I don't like being called a legend. It means I'm old.
You're wise. You're wise beyond your age.
I'm a wannabe. I'm not even a has-been. I'm just a wannabe.
You're the most legendary 29-year-old I know.
Boy, there you go. Okay, now we can start. All right.
First of all, Tony, just wanted to get into a little bit about your business. Just how I know I've talked with numerous small business owners, whether it be real estate, mortgage brokers across the board, talked to some people in the hospitality industry in the last week or so, just kind of getting an understanding of how your business has adjusted in the last month or so.
Yeah, sure. Well, from a purely business point of view, we haven't really been affected yet because we lag the market. We're 30, 60 days behind, so we're still quite busy. But every deal's impacted. The clients are stressed. You know, they have this house deal going on in conjunction with teaching their kids school or dealing with elderly parents or trying to find toilet paper or whatever other stresses are on in everyone's life. So, everyone's just on edge. And the same thing with our staff. They need to log on and work from home and get files done. But at the same time, they've got kids to teach at home and they've got parents to worry about and they've got shopping to do. So it's just a stressful time for everybody. Us, I don't know who wouldn't be stressful for. So it's had a significant impact in terms of personnel, in terms of file management, in terms of the work on each file. In every single way, it's affected our business.
Knowing that it's kind of a unique business to be in, being 30 to 60 days behind what is happening in other industries. Knowing that, have you kind of adjusted, whether it be marketing strategy or content creation or anything, looking forward to the next 60, 90 days of understanding that it'll be a little bit slower than typical this time of year?
Well, we've done a few things. We've certainly done some what I call disaster budget. So let's just say the market drops 20, 40, 60%. What does that look like?
Yeah.
Being one of the older guys in the industry, I have the benefit of being through 2008, the financial crisis that happened back then. So in terms of staff initiatives and caring for them, we've got some experience with that. We're doing a lot of, I know you guys are big on social and it's worked well for you. I'm not, we don't do a lot of it, but we're doing a lot more updates just on Facebook and email blasts and things like that. So this is a very fluid and dynamic situation. It changes constantly. And so we're using Facebook and our email newsletters just to keep on top of things from that point of view. But we haven't done much else apart from that.
I guess how often are you answering questions?
Yeah.
Sorry, what was it?
Sorry, I kind of spoke over you, Denny, there. But I imagine you're answering a lot of questions these days, or you're getting them. Is there a wave of people that have been reaching out to you or your company on, can I get out of this offer? Is my deal going to complete? All of the above?
Yeah, there's kind of two main questions we've received since about the middle of March, when it seemed, the travel bans and all that stuff came in. The first one was, what happens if the LTSA, the Land Title Survey Authority, what if that closes? What if lawyers and notaries are shut down and realtors are shut down? There's an awful lot of stress about that in the first couple of weeks. And then the government thankfully came out with a list of businesses that would be open if we ever went to a essential services type scenario. And turns out the Land Title Office would be open, lawyers would be open, realtors and moving companies would be open. So those phone calls have gone away. We know the deals are going to get done. There's no issues of offices closing. So apart from the normal stuff, deals will get done. Now, the phone calls then became, what if I don't close? I'm a buyer. I put down $20,000 on a $500,000 condo. What if I walk? And that's kind of gone away as well, because it's pretty clear to most people, certainly lawyers, realtors, mortgage brokers, that if you walk away from your deal, you're liable for not just the deposit, but any other damages the seller may incur. So if you have that scenario where you bought 20 down on a $500,000 condo and the seller mitigates and resells for 450, you're on the hook for the 50,000, not just the 20. So once buyers have been explained that scenario, we haven't had any yet where the buyer is not closing. So every one of our deals is closing so far. And we just finished 275 units for a major developer, and every one of those deals is closing. So people are still closing. I mean, people are still, they want this asset, whether it's a place to raise their kids or whether it's a long-term investment. They're still closing. So those are the two questions we received over the last month or so.
I have a few questions around that, but I guess just out of curiosity, I imagine, I'm hearing a lot of deals are closing. I imagine you've had some moved completion dates potentially, or some deals that got delayed for some reason.
Absolutely.
Have you run into, where are you finding the issues? Is it from the lender, from one of the parties getting nervous, or from maybe the other lawyer or notary on the other side? What are you seeing as potential factors that jeopardize a deal right now?
Well, not to throw our lender partners under the bus, but it's all them. It's all about the
Okay.
all you lender partners, I'm throwing you under the bus.
No, I don't think
I'm
that's
glad you had that. The disclaimer saved you there, Tony, I think.
Exactly.
And so when that happens, are you generally finding, lender, not the buyer, not the seller issue, buyer and seller are both motivated to close the deal? It's just a technical thing that you can overcome, or are you finding that that is causing bigger issues on deals where it gives a party an out?
No, it's not. It doesn't give the parties a note. The buyers entered into a subject-free deal. They, at one point they may have had financing as a subject clause, but that clause was removed, and now it's a last minute. But what we find, the lenders have a policy of wanting the clients to sign papers wet ink, so we have the technology, and we'll talk later about remote video signings, which we're doing now, which are now allowed. So we can do all that stuff, but lenders won't allow it. So if a client's selling property, we can meet them over Zoom or Skype or FaceTime or whatever. If they're buying a property without a mortgage, no problem. We can meet that client online any time of day. But if they're getting a mortgage, now it depends on the lender. And is the lender going to allow them to sign remotely, sign over a video technology platform, whatever that may be? And that seems to be the issue. Some lenders are getting on board now. Scotia was the first. Big shout out to Scotia there. First National has approved it, but other lenders, I won't mention their names, have turned us down. So now you have a client who's overseas. They can't travel here. It just can't happen right now. They want them to see a lawyer or notary to witness the signatures. Well, that's not happening overseas. So that's typically the problem that we encounter.
That could potentially lead to a collapsed deal, I imagine, if you can't sign in wet ink, correct?
It could, but the sellers so far have been, somewhat. Everyone's been fairly sympathetic. This is a unique, once in a generation event, and sellers, they don't want the bother of having to relist their property and re-engage and all that stuff. So they'll give a week extension, 2-week extension. Maybe we'll do an escrow close. An escrow close. So there's solutions, and every file is a little different. So far, we found one for every file, but people, at this point of the game, people want to buy or sell. The emotions are gone now. Let's get on with it.
So from like the buyer or seller's perspective, the concern of the lender dropping the ball on the final day, safe to say you feel that those rocky days are over and moving forward it will be more smoothly. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Yeah, I think the worst is over.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm very curious to understand what justifies a frustrated contract then. I mean, we're in a pandemic where there's clear scenarios where we might not be able to close, but that doesn't necessarily relieve someone of damages to collapsing a deal. So just to give an example, what are examples that would allow someone to know?
Earthquakes, Acts of God. So the standard form contract of purchase and sale does not have what's known as a force majeure clause. Force majeure means like it's an act of God, an earthquake, something really significant like that. And you see that in developer contracts sometimes, where if there is an act of God, the deal gets extended automatically. You don't need approval from any particular party. It's just automatically extended. That's not in the standard form contract that you two would typically use. So the deal is supposed to close. Now, the parties can agree to extend, and most times they do. But if they don't, the buyer was unable to close, the seller was ready, willing, and able to complete. Just because the buyer's financing didn't come through, that's not the seller's problem. That's the risk of the buyer. And so that would be a situation where the buyer is most likely on the hook. Now, again, we're generalizing here, and every contract needs to be looked at for any particular clauses. But generally speaking, if the buyer does not close after removing their subjects, even if it's through no fault of their own, the bank decides at the last minute to pull the financing, that's the buyer's problem, not the seller's problem.
Mm-hmm.
On this note of for like potential frustration in a contract, can we just quickly discuss the changes in tenancy and rental rules right now?
Yeah, great segue. So, as of March 30th, I believe that was the exact date, the government passed an order that says any eviction given from that day forward, so March 30th or later, due to, for any reason, almost every reason, is not enforceable. It doesn't. You can't even give an eviction notice. So you want your kid to move in. You're entering into a contract. You want vacant possession. Don't bother giving an eviction order. It's of no force and effect. The tenant was not required to leave. If you gave an order if you gave an eviction notice prior to March 30th, it's a little weird, but the order is still valid, but nobody will enforce it. So the tenant is still required to leave, but if they don't, there's nothing anyone can do about it. So buyers who've entered into contracts asking for vacant possession, they're got a couple kids, are about to move in, they may find closer to completion date or possession date that the tenant is not moving out, and there's nothing they can do about that. They might be able to do later on, but there's nothing they can. It's a real awkward situation. I think the government's done a great job with handling this pandemic so far, but this is one area where there's just a lot of uncertainty.
Now, speaking on that example, if a buyer knows that they bought a tenanted property and they're concerned about vacant possession coming up, and that's requirement of the contract, if they know that the contract's not going to be met the way that it is intended, and this, like in a dream scenario, you have both the buyer and seller agree to a date extension that's agreeable. But if in this case, where we're in this weird time where, say, seller doesn't want to change the date, they want to complete on time, buyer knows they're not getting vacant possession, they know that that's a breach of what the contract agreed to. What do you suggest happens in these scenarios? I mean, where the breach doesn't happen until completion, but it's going to happen, and the buyer knows it.
Well, I mean, what I suggest happens is each side lawyer up, get some legal advice. I haven't had the time to do the research yet on whether vacant possession is a fundamental term, if that constitutes a breach of the contract, or if that's just damages.
Right.
I don't know if the seller would be liable because it's a government order. It's not an action of the seller that's made the property unvacant. I know that doesn't make sense, but so I really don't have an answer to that one, guys. I wish I did. Just haven't had time to get to that one yet. Now, we haven't had a client in that situation so far. We've had people accommodate. I mean, most tenants are reasonable. Okay, we all hear horror stories, but so the tenants will go into the basement and the family moves upstairs. They figure some way out around it. So we haven't had a file like that yet in our office, so we haven't done the research. Not to say it's not going to happen 5 minutes after I hang up. Well, maybe, so far, so good.
Maybe a more important thing might be for the people writing offers right now, are there any sort of terms, conditions, clauses that you suggest get in there?
Well, it's hard to answer that over. Well, it's hard to give that clause over a podcast. But yeah, there'd be clauses about vacant possession, and if not, maybe the seller is responsible for the buyer moving, getting some other accommodation somewhere. I'm not sure how realistic that is.
Yeah.
So yeah, there are clauses, but again, we haven't got to where any of these are tested. When the force majeure clauses first started coming up, we had a lot of realtors call us and say, "Should I put this in? If the LTSA is closed and the lawyers or offices are closed, the deal will be extended." Most of us lawyers are saying, "No, don't put that in. We haven't had time to think about it. They're rushed. We haven't looked at court cases, and we're always worried. We're always on the lookout for unintended consequences."
Mm-hmm.
So I think if a client's concerned about that, you have a client, guys, you call up the lawyer, I'm not sure if a notary can draft those clauses or not, but get advice particular to what that buyer needs, and then we'll do our best with that.
So, like basically accompany or customize the offer. If you're concerned about dates, have some sort of term in there that leaves flexibility. If you're concerned about vacant possession, something there that runs into. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah. We just drafted one where, how do I simplify it? The completion day was going, as long as the tenant moved out before the end of August, the completion day would occur 5 days after. So we adjusted. So the buyer wasn't in a big panic for possession or completion. And so on that one there, we just had a moving completion date based on when the tenant moved out. So there's different options.
That makes sense.
We had something fairly similar with Oakland there, Jamie.
Yeah, that's
or
true.
Just the discussion of it, at least.
Yeah. Sometimes you have to commit to things you don't want to commit to in these weird times.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think in every market, someone's committing to something they don't want to commit to. I mean, a couple of years ago, buyers are writing over market offers, no subjects, no inspection, no financing, and they didn't want to, but they had to in order to get the property. And then so they're the buyers taking the risk. Other times, it's the seller. Real estate's an interesting world, that's for sure.
When you look
I would assume.
Oh, go ahead, Denny. You go ahead.
Okay, I would assume that these clauses are not going to be around any longer, but a few weeks ago, I did see a couple of them. People talking about COVID, and if for whatever reason we can't complete, the buyer or seller at their sole discretion has the option to extend. And obviously, I don't like how those were worded, and I think we got them out of most contracts that we dealt with specifically. But I couldn't really see how that was enforceable. And I guess moving forward, knowing that LTSA and notaries and moving companies and realtors are all deemed essential service, we likely won't need to deal with those.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tony, when you look at how your business has changed for this time, you talk about electronic signing there for a moment, and some lenders accommodating that. Do you feel that anything that you're doing now differently is going to last beyond this? Do you think that this, say it's electronic signing or anything that you're running into right now?
Yeah, I think every business is going through changes right now, and I think some of those changes are making us more efficient. And I look at how we were doing things 2 months ago, and I thought, why did we ever do it that way? Like the fact that we're now working, I probably have 2/3 of my staff working from home.
Yeah.
So we've had to look at how we print and assemble and handle checks and that kind of stuff, and we were so inefficient. And I always thought we were good. But I look at some of the things we were doing, and we will never go back to the old way of doing things. So, yeah, I do think that for all the pain that we are enduring right now, we will be a stronger firm after and will be more efficient. And I think a lot of businesses will, could be like that. I feel sorry for the restaurants and things like that. But yeah, I think we'll be stronger.
So, like a little more working from home, a little more Zoom meetings, stuff along those lines. Is that kind of what you're referring to here?
Stuff along like that, and our office is a little different because we have 18 offices. We're printing and scanning and sending documents all over the place.
Right.
Well, we never really sat down and said, how can Adobe help us merge documents together. So we're not printing and reordering and the documents and then rescanning them just to email to a lawyer. Why don't we just do that on Adobe and email the lawyer direct and not print that paper and save the steps and save the time? And so that's one. How we handle check deposits and wire transfers. We're now doing wire transfers for a couple major developers that we never thought of doing before. We would just go to the bank, stand in line with a check, and do a deposit to their account. So how we handle direct deposits, client deposits. Again, we print a check, go to the bank, stand in line, deposit it. Well, now we're doing wire transfers for a lot of that. Realtor commission checks. Why are we taking a check and standing in line and depositing it?
Yeah.
Why doesn't a realtor just e-transfer us the money? Not e-transfer, but wire us the money. Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of things that I think we can do better. And we will do better when this is all over.
When it comes to, I agree with a lot of the above. I mean, times are changing. I'm thinking about the electronic signature from a lender perspective for a moment. You mentioned that some lenders are okay with it, some aren't. I imagine there's more room for fraud as part of the intent there. Do you feel that that's something that can be handled? And do you think that's going to be a norm one day? Is a lender is allowing electronic signature?
Yeah, I don't know. And I personally, I have mixed feelings that they should allow it after this crisis is over. I mean, those are high-risk files. There is a greater chance of fraud. Now, lenders get title insurance, and title insurance protects them against fraud. But, if the fraud occurs, title insurance is going to go up and the consumer is going to pay more. And, I think back to a few months ago, we never had a problem meeting clients. Lawyers are around, notaries are around. There's one in every corner to pop in and sign some documents. Wasn't the greatest stress involved in the transaction. So, maybe remote clients, maybe clients in remote areas of the country or in the world, wherever. Remote signings are something we're doing now for this crisis. I think we all need to kind of give it a bit more serious thought on whether it's a good thing going forward. I know realtors went to DocuSign years ago. We can't yet. Should we? I don't know. I mean, it's one thing to have your credit card stolen and you lose $2,500. It's something else to have your house stolen and there goes $1.4 million on your house in Queen's Park.
Yeah,
that's a little different number.
Yeah. No, that would sting.
So not. I see the advantages. I also worry about the fraud and other things like that. So, but it's certainly worth a longer look down the road.
Are there extra due diligence steps from your end right now, Tony, with remote signings?
Yes. Yeah, we need to get the ID from the client in advance of the appointment. We need them to see the exact same ID. So it's almost like when you go through the border in the old days, you went through a border, the passport officer put the picture up beside your face. We have the client do that on the screen, and we compare that to the ID we get. And then we just have to be a lot more vigilant with respect to power of attorneys and transfer of funds and all kinds of stuff like that. So there is more due diligence. I don't know if there's extra cost involved at the land title office. Our first registration is going through next week. We don't think there is, but they are extra work and they are extra time and the appointments take longer. So most of us are charging a little more for a remote appointment. And not a lot, like $100, $200, but it's just a little bit more because the due diligence and the work involved.
That's an interesting point that they're actually making you less efficient.
Yeah. But Denny, on that point, it's making us less efficient because we're used to doing things a certain way.
Right. Yeah, it's new.
And give us 3-4 weeks of doing remote signups, and it could be much more efficient for us.
Sure.
Working from home has been inefficient for the first week, and all of a sudden, this is great. I can get as much done. Don't need to drive to the office, and so give us time. It may be more efficient than what we're doing right now.
Tony, you've answered most on my list, but I do have one here. One of my questions, and I don't know if you have any experience with this, but I thought I'd ask anyway in case you do. Do you have you run into any situations about retail leases? With the fact that the hospitality industry is kind of out right now. Any current issues or changes to the retail space, or have you had any experience with that in the last month?
I've had no direct experience with that. We're a residential law firm,
Yeah.
but anecdotally, I mean, whether it's my friends that own commercial property or friends that are tenants, those rents aren't being paid either.
Yeah.
So those ones there, I mean, typically those are bigger mortgages. I mean, a lot of people have a condo and they've managed to pay it off and they're not getting rent. Okay, but for those people that still have property tax payments, everyone does, mortgage payments, strata fees, whatever it is, the retail sector is taking a hit. I mean, you're going to see it right now, and restaurants that aren't going to reopen, they're just shut down. Period. Well, that's vacant space, and no one's looking for space right now unless you're Amazon or someone like that. So yeah, it's that industry is being affected.
Yeah, I imagine probably there might be a few more clauses or terms in the future to leases that get signed moving forward to accommodate these kind of closures, I would imagine. I mean,
Oh, for sure. Yeah, yeah. Well, and those typically those leases there, they're drafted by lawyers on both sides, so they're very sophisticated documents, and some of them may have provisions about force majeure, and if a pandemic is a force majeure, does a lease get extended? Is it payable? All that kind of stuff. So that one there, even more than residential, is a case by case basis.
yeah, makes sense. Well, geez, Tony, Denny. Do you have any other questions? I mean, this has been great from my end. I got my list done.
I think the last thing is just obviously patience is important in these type of times when new business practices are being brought in and kind of learned, as you mentioned. How early should someone buying or selling reach out to you guys in a time like this? Should it be much earlier?
Well, in a normal market, we say right away. Now we say right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the earlier the better. And on that point, Danny, we get a lot of files, or we've received a lot of files lately from people who are going to use someone else, and that someone else was a one-person show.
Right.
There's no depth in the office, so to speak, and that lawyer or notary couldn't get the deal done. Either maybe they had experience with COVID, or they've got kids or parents to worry about, and so at the last minute, that file needs to be transferred out. So I think you always want to control who your clients use, but I think in this environment, you want to pick a firm that has more than one person. Whether it's a lawyer or notary, this isn't a shot at that, and it's not meant to be a sales pitch, but you want the capability, if one person goes absent, someone else just picks up the file and closes it.
Sure.
And on your point about patience, I listened to a podcast from a mortgage broker about a week ago, and he was saying that when the mortgage deferral program opened up, the big banks were getting 15 to 30,000 calls or emails a day. And he said, now think about that. Some poor person is a call center operator, and they've got kids at home from school, and they need to manage that, or they have elderly parents, or they can't go out and do their thing, and they've got someone on the phone who's giving them grief because it's taken them hours to get a response. Like, show some patience. Everyone's got their things going on. Not everyone gets to retreat to their house and live life and just do whatever. There's a lot of people are in tough situations, whether it's staff at law firms, whether it's bank people, whether it's mortgage people. Everyone needs to just have some patience. That's a great line right there.
I think that's a good note. I know from my personal perspective, and the business banker that we use, she's been going overtime. Her emails have been coming in at random days and hours, and I know that she's been going overtime. So I think anyone in the finance or banking industry right now that's has some of their business towards lending, customer service, or business is just has had a very busy month over the past 30 days.
Yeah, very much so.
All right.
Well, I appreciate that.
Tony, thank you. Tony, thank you very much for jumping on this morning. Very helpful for us and for listeners, I'm sure. I wanted to leave you with giving yourself a little bit more credit in terms of, you mentioned at the beginning that we're very handy on social media and that kind of thing. I've been watching your YouTube videos, Tony. You're getting much better in front of the camera.
YouTube star.
Well, geez, thanks for that.
And obviously, as a realtor, there, on a serious note, as a realtor, there's a lot of useful information and that kind of stuff. So I know from my personal perspective, I really appreciate taking the extra effort to answer those questions. You know, I watched a couple regarding GST, I think, that were questions that, you know, I'm a little confused about. So that kind of stuff I think is really helpful for people in our industry.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Tony, how would listeners listening to this, how would you like them to best look for your company or reach out if they have an upcoming completion or deal coming?
Well, the website is bcrealestatelawyers.com. So you can go there. Just a simple phone call, 527-4242. Real estate at Spags Law, our Facebook page, you know, whatever it is. And then if your listeners, if they have a question, feel free to send that over, but identify themselves as a client of yours, because we're bombarded, obviously, with questions, and there's always a hierarchy in who we reply to first. And so, you know, if we know who the referral source is and where the person came from, that gets a bit more than just someone finding us on Google. Not to put down people who just find us on Google. I don't mean that at all. But, you know, if you get 2 phone calls, you got to return one first. You go by the referral source, at least we do.
No, that makes sense. And I think a good kind of recap on this is, you know, from a buyer-seller perspective, just kind of on the whole episode as a whole, on the buyer-seller side, don't have concerns. Well, I guess lighten your concerns about your upcoming transaction completing, because they are going through. But maybe have that early phone call with your lawyer or notary before you choose that person to make sure they have either more than one person in their firm or a backup plan if things don't go ahead as planned.
Absolutely.
But and then for your firm, you have 18 offices, so you have plenty of backup plans. So amazing. Well, no, I appreciate your time on this, Tony. I think I hope the listeners got some value. I know I did.
All right, guys. Thanks for having me on. Always nice chatting. Chat soon.
Thanks, Tony. Have a great day.